July 1969. Two football teams walked onto a pitch, chasing a World Cup dream. 5 weeks later, tanks were crossing the border, bombs were falling from the sky, and thousands of people were dead. History remembers it as the Football War, but football was never the real cause. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a sport became the trigger for one of Latin America's strangest conflicts, and the 50 years of buried tension behind it. To understand why a football match nearly burned down two countries, you have to understand the land they were standing on. Honduras and El Salvador are neighbors in Central America, but their situations couldn't have been more different. Honduras was reportedly more than 5 times the size of El Salvador. Yet El Salvador's population was significantly larger, packed into a fraction of the space. In El Salvador, land ownership was reportedly controlled by a small elite, a handful of powerful families who held a disproportionate share of farmland, much of it dedicated to coffee exports. The majority of the population were left with tiny plots or no land at all. Wages were low, work was scarce, and for decades, the only way out for thousands of Salvadoran families was to walk across the border into Honduras. By 1969, more than 300,000 Salvadorans were reportedly living and working in Honduras, many on banana plantations, many having lived there for years, some for decades. They weren't invaders. They were laborers, family, communities that had built lives on land that wasn't technically there. And that technically is where everything starts to go wrong. In 1962, Honduras passed a land reform law. On paper, it was about redistributing land to landless Honduran peasants. In practice, by the time it was fully enforced in 1967, its implementation reportedly resulted in many Salvadoran immigrants losing access to land they had been farming, including many who had lived there for years and believed they had established their lives in Honduras. Entire families who had farmed the same land for years were reportedly forced off it. Thousands of Salvadoran laborers were expelled. Then, in 1969, the Honduran government made it worse, refusing to renew a bilateral immigration treaty with El Salvador, opening the door to even more deportation. Picture this: tens of thousands of people, some of whom had never set foot in El Salvador as adults, being marched back across a border into a country that had no land, no jobs, and no room for them. Many returned beaten. Some walked over 100 miles to get there. This is the part most people never hear. This is the actual war. The football was still 3 months away. In June 1969, Honduras and El Salvador were drawn against each other in the qualifying rounds for the 1970 FIFA World Cup. Under different circumstances, this would have just been sport. In the summer of 1969, it was gasoline on an open flame. Game 1, Tegucigalpa, June 8th. The night before the match, Honduran fans reportedly surrounded the Salvadoran team's hotel, throwing rocks, setting off firecrackers, keeping the players awake for hours. Honduras won 1-0. Salvadoran fans reportedly responded by setting parts of the stadium on fire. Game 2, San Salvador, June 15th. Now it was El Salvador's turn for revenge. Salvadoran fans reportedly rioted outside the Honduran team's hotel. At the start of the match, instead of the Honduran flag being raised, a dirty rag was flown in its place. El Salvador won 3-0. Anti-Salvadoran riots erupted across Honduras afterward. Game 3, Mexico City, June 26th. A neutral playoff, supposedly safe ground. El Salvador won 3-2 in extra time. The same day, El Salvador severed all diplomatic relations with Honduras, claiming that around 12,000 Salvadorans had been forced to flee Honduran territory in the days following the riots. 3 matches, 3 escalation, and by the time the final whistle blew in Mexico City, 2 governments were no longer speaking to each other. What followed wasn't immediate. For 2 weeks, the 2 countries traded accusations across the border. On July 5th, El Salvador reportedly claimed Honduran troops had crossed into its territory. On July 12th, Honduras claimed 4 of its soldiers had been killed in a Salvadoran incursion, a claim El Salvador dismissed outright. On July 13th, mortar fire was reportedly exchanged near the border town of El Poy. 6 Honduran civilians were injured. Then, on the evening of July 14, 1969, at around 6 p.m., the Salvadoran Air Force launched airstrikes against Honduran airfields. Some of the aircraft used were civilian planes hastily converted into makeshift bombers. One of their primary targets was Toncontín Airport, which also served as an important military air base for Honduras. Ground troops followed. Salvadoran forces pushed across the border on 2 fronts, one heading toward the economically vital Sula Valley, the other advancing along the highway toward the Honduran capital, Tegucigalpa. For ordinary civilians, the war arrived without warning. Families reportedly sheltered inside their homes as artillery echoed across the border. Roads filled with refugees carrying only what they could hold. In less than a day, football had disappeared from the headlines. Survival had replaced it. For a brief, terrifying moment, it looked as if El Salvador might actually win. The war that followed lasted roughly 100 hours, which is why historians often call it the 100-Hour War. Honduras, caught off guard in the air, reportedly regrouped and struck back, hitting Salvadoran oil storage facilities at 2 port cities. On the ground, Salvadoran troops advanced quickly at first, but supply lines couldn't keep up. Some units reportedly ran out of fuel before they could reach their objectives. By July 18th, the Organization of American States had negotiated a ceasefire. It took until July 20th to fully take hold. El Salvador resisted full withdrawal for days, demanding guarantees for Salvadorans still inside Honduras. But by early August, Salvadoran troops had pulled back across the border. The human cost was severe. Estimates vary, but casualty figures reportedly range from around 2,000 to as high as 6,000 people, with tens of thousands more displaced, most of them Salvadoran families who had built lives in Honduras for years, suddenly forced to start over in a country that had no space for them. Here's what most retellings of the football war leave out. The 4-day war was just the beginning of the damage. El Salvador's economy reportedly suffered for years afterward. The flood of returning refugees worsened an already severe land crisis, deepening the poverty and inequality that had caused the war in the first place. Some historians argue this unresolved pressure, landlessness, economic desperation, a population denied any outlet, fed directly into the brutal Salvadoran civil war that erupted a decade later, a conflict that would kill far more people than the War of 1969 ever did. The 2 countries didn't even formally resolve their territorial disputes until 1980, when they signed a peace treaty. And parts of the border dispute reportedly weren't fully settled until the International Court of Justice ruled on it years after that. So when people call this the war football started, it's not quite right. Football didn't load the gun. 50 years of land theft, displacement, and inequality did that. History didn't remember the land dispute. It remembered the football match. That's the power of a single moment. It can hide decades of truth behind one unforgettable headline. 3 football matches, 50 years of buried tension, 100 hours of war that the world still talks about today. If this story surprised you, comment 100 hours below. I want to know what part of this hit hardest. And if you want to go deeper into stories where sport, politics, and human tragedy collide, stick around. Next up, we're heading into the frozen heart of the Ural Mountains for one of the most unexplained disappearances in history, the Dyatlov Pass incident. This is Murk Vault, where hidden truths are brought into the light.